Just like the Blitzkrieg of executive orders in the first 100 days, which stunned the enemy into momentary paralysis, Donald Trump has launched a Blitzkrieg peace initiative ahead of his trip to Saudi Arabia Tuesday. If you think clearly about it, you will see it has been in formation for weeks, but manifests itself as a total shock and surprise. Whoa, you say, where was that in the news cycle? That's because the press, as usual, is simply pumping out prearranged narratives and ideological fantasies which have little to do with the realities being created. Trump discredited all their breaking news, and he orchestrated the whole thing for that result, profiling how his opponents would react and outflanking them. The truth is that Zelensky and the European clowns have no cards to play except the horror of further slaughter. Trump has said this openly. He knows that Putin is not some isolated madman, as Washington's fever dream says. He just hosted 27 heads of state for Victory Day. If they want to know the result of continuing the war, they should look at Gaza right now, as Danny Davis has said. The enemy is responding with a bunch of George Soros demonstrations in New York and elsewhere, which are taking a very dark turn. They claim that Trump is a new Hitler who has to be fought violently if necessary. Under that violent insurrection and sedition banner, the total mission of the Democratic Party now rests. As Trump's reordering of the world continues, he is fighting very powerful forces, forces discredited by their incompetence, stupidity, and gross entitlement, it's true, but powerful and deadly forces nonetheless, who have big stakes in keeping things the way they have been. I will take a dive later into where this idea comes from, the idea that an American president exercising his powers under Article 2 of the Constitution is an authoritarian and a new Hitler. It may not surprise you that it comes from the same people who put Hitler into power in the first place. It's a gigantic cover story to divert attention from their historical criminal actions. To cover up their crimes against humanity, they launched a broad attack on the classical pillars of American intellectual and cultural life, starting right after World War II. They claimed that the nuclear family, our belief in God, our patriotism, our technological prowess, and our faith in FDR made us budding little Hitlers. And all of that had to be taken down and replaced by the absolute individual freedom found in the decadent present sex and drug obsessed culture. That culture itself was a deliberate creation. But first, let's take a look at Trump's peace offensive, which didn't just spring up in the last 72 hours. Look back over the past week and you'll find that Trump was talking to Erdogan of Turkey last Monday about settling the Ukraine war. That was the deliberately vague reference in the White House readout of that call. Those unfamiliar with this history wouldn't remember that Erdogan and others had secured a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia back in 2022 when the war began. Then Boris Johnson went to Ukraine and informed Zelensky he was a dead man walking if he signed the deal. Biden and the Brits required the continued war. To underscore this point, one of the negotiators for Ukraine in the 2022 talks in Turkey, Denis Kariv, was immediately shot dead by the Ukrainian intelligence service, who claimed he was a Russian spy for agreeing to the terms. J.D. Vance was at the Munich Security Leaders Forum last Wednesday saying that two sides had to sit down and talk directly without the ceasefire precondition advocated by Europe and Ukraine. He called that a fixation. Russia has made clear that a ceasefire does not work for them unless the flow of new arms to Ukraine stops. Remember, they signed a big agreement for a ceasefire right after Ukraine began its attacks on the Russian-speaking Donbass region of Ukraine back in 2014, 2015. Former German Prime Minister Angela Merkel publicly admitted that these Minsk agreements were a ruse designed to give Ukraine time to build up its ability to attack Russia. Now, President Trump seemed to contradict Vance the next day, saying a ceasefire would be ideal. The Europeans and Zelensky had a big, happy powwow in Kyiv, thinking they had roped Trump in to supporting a ceasefire while they continued to arm Ukraine. Lindsey Graham and the warmongers of the Senate touted their tough sanctions package in preparation. Trump waited until Putin had completed the Victory Day celebrations in Russia to lower the hammer. This was also after much of Trump's MAGA movement had lined up behind Vance's statements and slammed the Europeans. Another fine example of great exertion of American power, which the Europeans call bullying, occurred at the same time when Germany's spy agency caved due to American pressure on its targeting of the AfD, Germany's biggest opposition party. They targeted them as enemies of the state. Now they have halted their intended mass surveillance and counterintelligence campaign against the main opposition party. Now, I said it's a peace blitzkrieg. Positive talks also happened over the weekend for an Iran nuclear deal. In addition, the U.S. is negotiating independently of Israel, again directly with Hamas, and leaks are all over the place that Trump is very unhappy about Netanyahu's plan to flatten Gaza in a renewed occupation and ethnic cleansing. The last surviving American hostage is scheduled to start his journey home today because of the direct Hamas negotiations. Israel has been out in the cold. Just now, Netanyahu met with Steve Witkoff and is sending negotiators to Doha for a new peace deal rather than occupying and flattening Gaza, which was his plan. The Iran negotiations head off Israel's desire to bomb all of Iran's nuclear facilities. If a peace can be reached with Iran, it changes the prospects of peace across the entire Middle East. That has the warhawks in the Senate dumbfounded, along with everyone out there who believes that Trump is somehow completely controlled by Israel. The tenuous ceasefire between India and Pakistan, negotiated by Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance at the end of last week, appears to be holding. And finally, in the last major development in this peace offensive, China and the U.S. sat down on trade over the weekend, and both sides say the talks made significant progress. Both sides have agreed to reduce their reciprocal tariffs for 90 days and to continue talking about an entirely new trade and economic relationship. Now, all of this happened in 72 hours, but experience tells you that that's just impossible given the complexity of international relations and their normal speed. It's clearly part of a plan which has multiple flanking options written into it, with the president deploying people centrally to execute the flanks. Now, think about it. What happens to the budget deficit if the forever wars end? If we're no longer the muscle for the modern British Empire? You can cut these huge, wasteful expenses. In his Truth Social post demanding that Ukraine meet with Russia and Turkey, Trump said he wants to focus on trade and rebuilding the economy, not wars. He is emphasizing and underlying that today by lowering prescription drug prices by 30 to 80% in an executive order. That, in turn, will dramatically lower Medicare and Medicaid costs and help seniors survive. We have to make sure this offensive continues. That means understanding how we got to the point where we almost lost our republic and mobilizing and educating in support of the president's agenda. We will lose if people sit out who showed up on November 5th, if they sit on the couch and sit out the midterms, which have to be prepared for right now. We still have a corrupt Congress. We are going to be fought by a seditious judiciary and media at every turn. The thing that is very, very clear now, however, is that this battle can be won if we have the guts, will, and intelligence to win it. Now, in our former incarnation as members of Lyndon LaRouche's political movement, we studied the rise of Hitler and fascism extensively. An article by Will Wirtz in the Executive Intelligence Review summarizes some of our findings, and the link is being provided as part of the posting of this show on the Promethean Action website. Wirtz documents how the top levels of Wall Street, like the Dulles brothers, the Harrimans and their toady Prescott Bush, and the Morgans, collaborated with German industrial cartels to put Hitler into power. They were joined by the top layers of British central banking, the British Empire's government, and the monarchy. Churchill only resisted because he didn't want to give the British Empire to Hitler. He personally loved and promoted Mussolini's brand of fascism. The grand plan idea was to arm Germany to attack Russia and absorb Eurasia in order to rule the world through exploiting Eurasia's vast mineral and other resources. But Hitler went west, attacking Britain first rather than Russia. The same grouping was all heavily involved in the eugenics and race theories central to Hitler's Nazi creed. The New York Times and Time magazine of the period are awash in favorable stories about Hitler, but particularly favorable stories about Mussolini. After the war, the American Jewish Committee, of all people, sponsored studies by the Marxists and Freudians from the Rockefeller Foundation and MI6 and CIA's sponsored Frankfurt School, claiming to show how Hitler became possible. Of course, they obliterated the actual history and Hitler's sponsorship by Wall Street, the City of London, and the Vichy Bank of Worms. Instead, they pinned it on authoritarian personalities and authoritarian tendencies in populations. They claimed that Americans had deep-seated tendencies toward authoritarianism, prejudice, and anti-Semitism as a result of their hierarchical culture, the nuclear family, American belief in a transcendent monotheistic God, and their nationalism, patriotism, and devotion to technological progress. Moreover, Americans had just tolerated a strongman president in the form of Franklin Roosevelt. Thus, the same people who put Hitler into power resolved to destroy the pillars of American culture and put a hedonistic sex and drug obsessed culture in its place in order to create a population incapable of resisting the exodus of core industries, manufacturing, and farms which followed. They also wanted to ensure there was not another Roosevelt. That descent into the elite's dystopian future for all of us has now been stopped by Donald Trump. We have to make that stick and begin, as Trump says, to build the future. Again, my very humble thanks for the compliments you throw my way in the comments. Some of you took my pleas to heart on Saturday and became subscribers to Promethean Action, providing the larger amounts of funding which allows us to grow faster. Thank you very, very much. We have a mission. We have to win. Winning means making sure that these briefings get the widest circulation and discussion so people are prepared for the battles ahead. It means doing these briefings daily and providing background features to show you why we say what we say. Again, please go to Promethean Action website and subscribe. Susan will be with you on Wednesday. I'll see you again on Saturday. Again, thanks a lot for listening.
Thanks for watching. Please take a moment and subscribe to our free newsletter at prometheanaction.com.